The Provoke Podcast, brought to you by Provoke Media and produced by the international broadcast specialist Marketeers.
My name is Christine Hani-Dare-Bryan with Provoke Media. I am thrilled to be here with Tracey Schroeder, who is Chief Communications and External Affairs Officer with Inova, Northern Virginia and the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area's leading nonprofit healthcare provider, and the 2025 Press Ganey Health System of the Year. Inova has 5 hospitals in Northern Virginia, more than 250 care sites, more than 26,000 employees, and has more than 4 million patients visits a year. Inova has been on the cutting edge of patient care. It opened the first Pride Clinic in Northern Virginia. Its CEO, Dr. Jones, is also a practicing urological surgeon. And as a nonprofit system, Inova reinvested $434 million in its community investment in 2024 alone, and is working to expand access to healthcare in Northern Virginia through the construction of 2 new hospitals in its eastern region. Tracy, it is thrilled to be here with you. You've been with Inova for the past 5 years, where you joined during the height of COVID, and you steered this network's communications through all of the changes the Washington, D.C. area has gone through in recent years. Before that, Tracy worked with huge brands like Ford, Coca-Cola, Nestle, and Marriott. So we have a lot to talk about today, particularly about how your experience with big consumer brands has lent itself to now working in the healthcare industry. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to chat today.
I am thrilled too. I'd love to ask you about just your background, like where you grew up and how you got into corporate communications, just like what, from a very early age, you feel like kind of set you on this path.
Yes, thank you so much. Well, I grew up in York, Pennsylvania, which is about an hour north of Baltimore. I loved to write. I was, frequently participated in essay contests. I was editor of my high school paper. I really sort of found a love of writing, but I also, really was attracted to sort of the strategy that goes into business and marketing and communications. And in part, my dad was an attorney. And so, talking with him, the power of persuasion, being able to kind of understand how he was approaching something, I really sort of liked that same intersection. And, he was not a fan of me becoming a lawyer. And he was like, you'd be so much better in business. And so I really, I ended up, I was going to either pursue sort of marketing and communications or pursue English with the idea of being a teacher. And I ended up going the business route. And I really think that sort of lent itself to bringing all those passions together. And, now I'm, 25 years into my career, and, the writing has always continued to be something that's just a skill. And it's amazing how many people don't have it, but it's amazing how valuable it continues to be for me, but also the people I hire. That ability to be a storyteller and to knit something together that's going to evoke emotion, invoke, somebody to want to take an action or want to try something or get to know something. So it's really kind of, this career has proven to bring all of those things I love together. My dad would probably say it's the, my desire to win the argument, but I would call that the power of persuasion.
So why did your dad say you'd be so much better at business versus law? Because it sounds like you've been so successful, you would be successful at anything. So why did he see that as the better path?
I think it probably, and being right now in Girl Scout cookie season with my own daughter.
Yes, I'm there too.
It was from those early school drives, Girl Scout cookie drives, things like that, where, he would see me go door to door and convince people of why they needed to buy something. My sister and I both worked at the Dairy Queen in our local hometown growing up. And, she would always tell a story that someone would come and be like, do you have raspberry? And she would say, no. And she's like, I ask Tracy. Tracy's going to say, well, we don't have raspberry soft serve, but I could make you a raspberry blizzard or a raspberry sundae or a raspberry milkshake or a raspberry slushy. And so, I was all about sort of, what can I do to make the customer happy? What are the things that I can offer them, not what I can't? And so that was always sort of a joke around our family kitchen table at night when she'd be just like, she would say, I would just tell the customer no. And Tracy would like take all these steps to explain everything they could have, all the other options that could make them happy.
I love that. So tell us, you mentioned that you were thinking about becoming an English teacher.
Yes. Yes. Well, from a very early age, it was because I wanted to call on people. I really, I'm a talker. And so I, always hated having to like raise my hand and wait until they got around to me. And so, but, as I got older, I took on a lot of leadership roles and I really liked being able to kind of bring others along and help them grow and to help understand their goals and mentor them and have them reach those goals. And so, whether that was training somebody at Dairy Queen, whether that was mentoring somebody when I was editor of the school paper, or, even later in my career as an early and a young leader, sort of helping people understand, how I'd position this or what I would change or what I thought the client was really looking for. Those were all things that I felt like I had a point of view on and could help others. And so I think that's where that innate sense of being a leader, kind of lends itself to wanting to be a teacher too, because those are two sides of a similar coin. And, I do think, I had a chance a couple of years ago to be an adjunct professor for a few semesters at Johns Hopkins. And I think I made the right choice by not being a teacher. But it was a great, opportunity to dip my toe in. But it's a lot of out of classroom work. So to feel like and I was doing that at the same time I had a full-time, very demanding job. And so, I think if I was doing exclusively that, it would probably be very satisfying. But trying to do that at the same time, I thought, you felt like you were kind of maybe shortchanging both at some times. And I certainly didn't want to ever do that. So it ended up being a lot of, late nights and long weekends, just, grading papers and giving feedback and that sort of thing. So, so I think, I found my right calling in marketing and communications.
Oh, that's wonderful. So tell me, we'll fast forward, you graduate from college and you head to Washington, D.C. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And you worked on some incredible brands, over huge household brands like the Ford F-150, Marriott, Nestle. I would just love to dive in and hear from you about what you really learned from each of these brands and how they really set you up for your current job at Inova, starting with the Ford F-150.
Yeah, sure. I mean, if I could, let me take you back even further because I think every path, every stop along my career path has been instructional in some way, and that I've taken key things that I've continued to apply for the duration of my career. So when I first got out of college, I worked as a marketing coordinator at a design and architecture organization that's still in the DC area today. And what I was so impressed there and what I really feel like I brought forward from that is just a keen eye and appreciation for the importance of presentation. That it's as much about what you're saying as it is about how you're presenting what you're saying. And, I think we've all been in meetings where somebody puts up a slide and they're like, well, it's an eye chart, but being able to really direct someone's attention to where you want it to be, I think it's as much of the storytelling as the words that you say. And so I think, that was one of the things that I've took away from working there, just that appreciation of design and presentation. That led me to my next company, which was a social media agency right at the inception of social media, early 2000s, when that was, coming to life with Facebook and brands were like, oh, wait, this is a new area we can go into. And now it's not, one way dialogue. It's two-way. There's many like message boards and online forums where now our customers can tell us directly, what exactly they think about our products. And we don't have to wait for that focus group feedback or those surveys to be mailed back in or whatever it is. We're getting that feedback in real time and can pivot our strategies and can be responsive to those customers. So a really powerful movement in communications that, was amazing to be part of so early in my career. And in some ways, I was, 4 or 5 years into my career, I was still very much learning too. And what I took away from those years is why I felt like I could really be helpful with getting companies on social media and helping them understand the value and how they wanted to optimize their presence on those platforms. I still had a lot to learn from real world experience when it came to brand and product marketing and building a reputation. And those are the things that I learned by working with some of these really well-known clients. And I often say to my team, early in my career, I learned as much from my clients as I did, as benefit I brought them. It was very mutual.
Interesting.
And I still think back to those early days and tell, team members or even, people getting started in their career who I've sort of mentored or talked to, that if you can go to an agency and get experience, it's sort of second to none when it comes to real world experience. The variety of things you'll work on, the types of clients and industries you will get exposed to, and the problems you will get to solve give you just if you are open to learning and just being a sponge, there's no better environment to do that, especially in your earlier career where, in my case, certainly I wasn't married then. I didn't have children then. So I was able to completely just sort of lean in and focus and was very, hungry and ambitious for those opportunities. And when you do that, when you're a hand raiser like that, agencies are very happy to take you up on it. And so, you get so much exposure and experience. And so it's really, something I would say, there's no other training ground that would give you that. When I left the social media agency, I went to Burson Marsteller, so longtime PR agency. They were building their digital skills. I joined to come and help build and lead their digital practice. And that was really because I wanted more exposure to not just social media, but all the things within digital that I felt like I was limited at the previous agency at that time. Their scope was pretty narrow. They have, of course, since expanded it. But at that time, I was like, well, we don't build websites. We don't do this. So I don't feel like I could take those recommendations because they don't, I wanted an agency that had, a greater sort of purview of operations and things that we could offer, because that's what I wanted to be recommending. And that's where I saw opportunity for the social and the digital and the, customer service and the retail strategies and product strategies to all come together. And so that was really the learning moment when I was at Burson, was that not only was I working with larger teams, but also really well-known clients and getting a lot of exposure. So whether it was investor relations or product launches, you mentioned the F-150, working with really, deep research teams that would bring all this knowledge and product background to the table. It was just such a opportunity to see how an organization knits all this together in service, of a top, Fortune 100 company. And that was awesome.
Let me pivot you back to the Ford F-150. I was thinking about you yesterday because I saw like a little boy walking down the street with his father yesterday in Midtown Manhattan, and he was in the early formation of his words, and he was talking about the Ford F-150. So you worked on a brand that, and when I was at NBC News, a Ford F-150 news was like major news that had to be covered because it reaches such a broad swath of the American audience. So you have, it's some of the first words that children are speaking in America. It's on all the major networks.
I don't even know if they know that soundbite.
And you were working on some of the early messaging, right, of this truck?
Yeah, well, so I was working on with them in, like 2013, 2014, when we were preparing for the launch of the 2015 F-150.
Okay.
And so it was very much I mentioned the research teams. And so they were, one of the things that came out of focus groups was that, someone had taken a Coke can and was like, is this the the new aluminum being used with F-150 because EPA regulations had stipulated that they had to cut the weight of the car. And so there was a real opportunity to make sure, consumers understood that Ford was, having to, abide by these regulations, but was also taking steps to make sure they were never sacrificing the quality or the safety. In fact, they were making it better. It was military grade aluminum alloy. And so it was making sure we could communicate to consumers that, this is still one of the toughest, smartest, most reliable trucks on the market. And that was really the messaging that we leaned in on to make sure that we could communicate that despite these very well publicized, regulations that were sort of happening to, and not just Ford, to the industry at large, that there was an opportunity to make sure that the consumer understood that steps were, that no step was being missed, that there was still an opportunity, or there was still, the truck was still going to be the very best that it could be, and exactly what consumers had come to count on for so many years. And I think at that time it was 37 years running, and it was the highest selling vehicle or truck in the United States. So it had been popular for years and years already. And to your point about being at NBC and always, if there was news, you had to cover it, same thing. Like, this was a very popular truck. And so there was, working with Ford to make sure consumers, understood that they were still going to be getting this amazing vehicle that also had this technology integrated. And, and it ended up coming out and being, a very well-loved vehicle and well-regarded and just getting great reviews. And I think all of that was because we were able to tell the story of all the steps Ford had taken to ensure that nothing that the consumer valued was sacrificed.
Oh, interesting. Okay, which also gets into kind of the health and safety, and not to go too far ahead in your story, but I'm guessing you're working with now at Inova, like kind of communicating.
Health, yes, exactly. And, health and safety, is paramount to what we do, right? Like, and in some ways I came into a position and I was very fortunate to come into an organization that is already so highly regarded by top safety and quality organizations like Leapfrog, like CMS, like U.S. News and World Report. There's,
interesting. Okay.
You mentioned we're Press Ganey's 2025 Health System of the Year. There was, all of that is because we work so hard to ensure that our safety and our quality metrics are, second to none, essentially. There's nothing more important in the delivery of care. And our CEO does a really good job and make sure we all know that we're here in service of the mission. And everyone around the organization believes that. We talk about it a lot. We talk every day about safety. We have a daily safety stand-up call where we are talking about, potential things that we want to keep an eye out for, or there's a shortage of this, or be aware this system is down. And we're always talking about that and troubleshooting in real time together because it's such a inherent part of our culture that is never anything that we would want to. Everything else, I think, is secondary when it comes to the quality of care, and I think most patients would be very glad to hear that too.
Let me ask you. I'm going to pivot back to Marriott and how you were involved with its purchase of Starwood. So that's another thing that brings up a lot of feelings. I remember people being so loyal to the Starwood brand. So you were like really navigating a messaging issue there. Would love to get your thoughts on that and how that also shaped other things you've worked on, and even circle back to your work today.
Yeah, I think, listen, my takeaway from my time at Marriott was, just in that instance, that situation in particular is the importance of two things: reputation, but also listening to your consumers. And so on my third week, I had just been hired. I just joined Marriott. It was my third week of work, and we announced the acquisition of Starwood. And so it really sort of changed sort of what I thought I'd be doing to what I ended up doing right away. And it took a lot of my initial focus for that first year. And I think, to your point, we announced it, and Starwood Preferred Guest, which was the name of Starwood's loyalty program, had a a passionate fan base. So when they learned that Marriott was acquiring Starwood, they were immediately concerned that this was going to put Starwood Preferred Guests, SPG, their loyalty program in jeopardy, that it wasn't going to be there for them, and all the points they had accumulated and all the benefits that they enjoyed would not be there for them. And, there is a very robust sort of social influencer presence when it comes to loyalty programs. And there was lots of articles there, so much so that I think it sort of jumped off those pages and became a mainstream media news story. And we were seeing, headlines and stories that just detailed, how concerned Starwood Preferred Guest members were about this acquisition. And we could have taken a very reactionary approach, and we didn't. We sort of recognized we are not going to solve this in a week or a weekend. We are going to solve this over multiple months, in a very deliberate and thoughtful strategy, which was to listen to what they were saying, to bring them in and invite them to come and talk to us. And I think we, invited them and did a bit of a 2-day, I think, session where they came into our offices and we sat down and we were, tell us what benefits you love. Tell us, where you find value. Tell us what are the things that, as we look to bring these programs together, what would be a win and what would be a miss, and really sought to understand that. And then we took other steps too. So in that process, we got that feedback, and all of that was kind of being used to inform the design of what would eventually become Marriott Bonvoy when we launched it. But in the interim, Marriott Rewards also made announcements about additional benefits. And they showed a good faith effort in, hey, Starwood Preferred Guest members are telling us that they really like late checkout or they really like suite upgrades. Let's make those components of the Marriott Rewards program too. Let's go ahead and try to start taking steps to show that these two programs are more on equal footing. And then by doing that, sort of start to build that, we're gonna do what we said we were gonna do. We're gonna bring the best of both together. And so there was a lot of effort being done to kind of make some good faith efforts to demonstrate that to the base that we were gonna do that. And then ultimately, I think, we were also in wanting to make sure that, when we launched with the credit cards and so forth, the other things that we knew that they appreciated, we gave multiple options. And so they really could choose the path that was best for them. And I think, when we ended up launching Marriott Bonvoy, we did so to a lot of, people that were saying they got it right, or
interesting. Okay.
I was worried, but I'm not anymore, or this is exactly where I would have wanted them to come out, and they did, and so a lot of people that had been previously critical or skeptical, we kind of won them over in the process. And, that was not, again, this was not a quote unquote crisis that we could have solved in a weekend. This had to be a multiple months process of learning, listening, and developing a program that we really felt would answer all the things that we were hearing.
Great. So kind of leading into the kind of third leg of the stool that would really set you up before going into a healthcare system, Nestle. And you worked with them. Oh, actually, there's 4 legs. You worked with Gerber, right? And then you worked with on Coke. Big brands. If you could really just speak briefly to both and how they shaped your kind of understanding of communications and really kind of set the stage for where you are now.
Yes. I mean, from Coca-Cola, it was, they were always pushing the envelope, and I loved that about them. I worked on their corporate website a number of years ago when they were really trying to, at that time, their strategy was to make it an online magazine. And we were inviting different writers and contributors. And it was really supposed to be more about sort of the lifestyle and a lot of different topics. And so that was just really pushing the envelope and trying new things and, evolving the strategy. Similarly, I did a social media training for them, again, early early-ish I'm trying to think what year that might have been, maybe around 2011. And they were observing what we still observe to this day, that there were employees that were wanting to use social media and they weren't sure how their personal and their professional presence should mix or not, and if that's something they could really control. And they asked us to develop a social media training for associates to take. And that was great because it really pushed the envelope on, understand. It was an organization saying, like, this is going to happen whether we like it or not. So let's go ahead and lean into that and make sure our employees are equipped for this change and understand what sort of the risks are and can manage themselves within that. So I thought that was a great learning, because the organization's not always going to control everything. There's a lot of things that are just going to happen. And I think we're seeing the same with AI right now, is that you can either lean in or you can just, pretend it's not happening and hope you don't have to deal with it and probably not be in your role in a year,
Right. Exactly.
You have to embrace it. You have to look at where and build your own perspective on, here's where it's really good and it aids my work and it makes things easier. And here's where it's still a little green and has an opportunity to become more savvy. And also it probably will. And so, so that's a really good learning from Coke. From Gerber, which is a Nestle brand, I learned so much about brand and launching and positioning products. I really, and that's probably, brand is probably true for all, which I think really helped me when I got here. But certainly Marriott, storied brand, very passionate brand fans, as I was talking about. Same with Ford. You saw a young child talking about that yesterday. All very storied brands, and that doesn't happen overnight. Like, there's a lot of thoughtfulness that goes into really creating a brand identity. And Gerber was one of the first places I felt like I really got a lot of exposure to that. Not only the brand building, but also the product positioning and the product marketing and all the strategy that goes into, every piece of that marketing mix. And that was such a learning for me there, is that it's, again, I think I said earlier, one of the best, early in my career, one of the best things was I would learn as much and be a sponge to my clients as I also brought to the table. And that was such a mutual benefit. And I really felt like I got that from Gerber.
So, Tracy, you've had this incredible experience with all of these brands, all of these household names, and then you come to Inova. So tell us what you have done there, what the demographics are like, and what you were really facing when you stepped into the job.
Thank you. I mean, so it was funny when I was first approached about this opportunity at Inova. I responded by saying, I don't have healthcare experience. And they said, that's what we want. I was like, oh, well then, okay, we can have this conversation. And so, and I think, that was emblematic of the fact that they were wanting healthcare to start bringing in some of the things that they were seeing other industries do. This sort of consumer first mindset, this access, this, personalization and the power of choice. I think all of those things were not consumer expectations of healthcare in the past, but it was Inova recognizing that they would be and that they should be. Healthcare was not immune to wanting to also, create some of those same conveniences and ease of choice and so forth that other industries were doing. And so I think that's what Inova was looking to do. And for me, it was at the time I remember saying to my husband, I really want my next move to be, somewhere where I can feel like I can have a meaningful impact. And this really answered that call. I think I mentioned to you earlier, we are a very mission-driven organization. Everybody that's here recognizes that the work they do, whether they are at the bedside or at a computer or checking someone in, they are supporting the patient experience and they have a role to play in delivering that. And that is so important to everyone that works at the organization. And that is something that our CEO, Stephen Jones, emphasizes all the time to everyone. The other piece of that, so you asked about sort of the Inova. So Inova is the largest private employer in the DC region, more than 26,000 team members, as you said. And we had strong leadership, and that was a really attractive component for me wanting to join here as well. I was not, I was coming into a newer leadership team. Stephen Jones joined in 2018, but also many of them had been established and then I was joining. And so there was a lot of energy and momentum around things that were so great about Inova, but then also things we felt like we could make a mark on and really improve, culture for one, how we worked as a system, the brand, et cetera. And so there was a real opportunity to, do some amazing work, which was very attractive to me. We also are the third busiest emergency department in the country, which I personally find startling. And I always think that is a stat that
Yeah.
surprises so many people. But obviously, we are just outside of Washington, D.C., and so this is a busy metropolitan area. But the third busiest in the nation is that is busy. And so I always find that to be so interesting, but also just an example of how well we have to operate as a system and work together in order for that to never not overwhelm us. And we take a lot of steps to not go on diversion, to not turn ambulances or patients away, to instead they work with my team to make sure that we're getting patients to the right place, whether it's urgent care, whether it's primary care, or in some cases, whether it is the emergency room, but having and helping people understand where they can go to get the best care so that, we can give it to them quickly and efficiently.
Let me just also let our audience know that you really came in at a time, like you came in during COVID, right? The DC area has gone through huge changes in the last year. I would guess that, there's kind of landmines everywhere in your work, in terms of getting care right and navigating all the stresses and pressures that your patient population has been under.
Yeah.
And so are there any lessons you bring from the consumer brands that you worked with before that you've then applied to this experience to what you're doing now?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. As you mentioned, I joined during COVID. I joined in January of 2021. And so it was right as the vaccine was coming out. It was, and it was in limited quantity. So you were dealing with this huge demand for a vaccine that wasn't at first readily available. It was a constant sort of communication management situation. There's been, other crises and communication imperatives along the way. CrowdStrike, when that happened and that outage happened, all of our systems go down as a result of that. The Baxter fluid shortage a year ago when we weren't, because of the hurricane, I think it was in North Carolina, we weren't able to get, and many hospitals weren't able to get the saline solution that we normally get. So we had to find different solutions. So to your point, healthcare is very used to navigating, what some would call crises, but we don't call them that because for us, it's the normal course of business. But
Interesting. Okay.
We are used to curveballs and we're used to managing through them. And we're pretty skilled at doing so. And I would say from my perspective, in terms of your question of what did I bring in, I think it's be quick, but don't be reactionary, be on top of it, but take the time to get the information that you need so that you're not having to backtrack on statements or change. You want to make sure you understand the full story, but you also want to let people know transparently what's going on as quickly as you can. And so it's a real, being quick and being efficient, but not overdoing it, because you don't want to ever have to sort of be like, that didn't actually turn out to be the case. You don't want to do that. You want to make sure you get your facts straight. And so I think that's a lot. I think also listening, understanding the audiences. In many cases, just like many industries, we don't have one audience. We have our patient audience, we have the wider community audience, we have our donors, we have our physicians and APPs, we have our team members, we have our leaders. Just like any organization, we have a dozen different audiences that we need to be considering, and considering how it's impacting, how any particular situation is impacting them, and equipping particularly our leaders when it's something that's going to affect our operations, that we are very quickly able to get information to our team members on how they need to change their operational procedures so that we can keep taking care of patients. That is always our number one goal is, what are we switching to? How are we going to downtime procedures if we need to? How are we? And so we have a lot of practice and also a lot of standard procedure in if this, then this, because we always have to be gaming different things out and being prepared.
Just building on your background and your experience now in healthcare, there's this, whole movement in healthcare about the personalization of healthcare, the consumer experience, and specifically the patient experience. So what do you think that the healthcare industry can learn more broadly from consumer brands and what you've seen in your work?
Yes. I mean, I think in both hospitality and healthcare, there's the primary goal is always delivering an exceptional experience. In healthcare, we want that to be quality healthcare. We want that to be safe. We want it to be convenient and have you access it in the time and place that you want to access it. In hospitality, very similar. We want to make it easy for you to book the thing that you need to book in the place that you need to go for the price that you want. And so it's really about giving customers choice or patients choice. It's about giving options, knowing that there's not a one size fits all, but that consumer preference is really just that. Your preferences are going to be different than mine. You might feel better talking to somebody. I might want to do it at 11 p.m. from my bed on my phone, and so
Right.
how we book, how we interact, how we have that experience. Do I want to go and be greeted at the front desk when I'm checking in at a hotel and somebody to give me my key? Or do I just want to use my app because it's late at night and I've been traveling all day and I want to go up to my door and have it let me in? I think in the same way hospitality has created options for people, I think healthcare is seeking to do the same. Do you want a telehealth visit? Do you want a home health visit? Do you want to come in and sit across from your doctor? And so it's really about creating choice and options so that we're putting that in the hands of the consumer to decide what's best for them.
Tell me, part of your job also seems to be, making sure that you're promoting access to healthcare. So can you tell me about some of the initiatives you've worked on, knowing that having this kind of consumer brand experience to make it easier for the patients you serve to get the care they need? How have you taken those prior experiences and applied them to the concept of healthcare access?
Yeah, absolutely. So healthcare access is a big topic, especially now. I think, you've seen, and this is maybe not as prevalent now as it was a couple of years ago, but after COVID, we saw that many people delayed their care, that they waited. And so then we were seeing, higher volumes, higher acuities, a need for people to sort of with some level of urgency to get that care. And so our hospitals and our care sites were very full. And we had to create access. And we've done that in a couple of ways. So one is giving consumers more choice. So whether that is, having a telehealth appointment, having a home health appointment, as I just mentioned. Sometimes it's you're calling the call center and you have the option of you maybe don't ever have to talk to an agent. Maybe you just say, I need to switch my appointment from next Tuesday to next Wednesday. And that can all happen within the call center system without you ever having to connect with people or connect with an agent. And so we're trying to put things in place that can help you solve your problem even faster. That doesn't always take a human being. There is always a human being there. If your question is more involved or, you want to have that human touch, that's your preference, then we certainly have that option. But if you don't, there's another way to get that done. That's one of the ways we're creating access. Another way of we're doing that is freeing up the time of physicians and APPs. So we are looking at ways to unburden them, take away from quote unquote pajama time, which is the time that they use for documentation after hours to kind of finish patient charts and do things like that. We're putting in technologies that allow them to get through that faster. That'll have an AI, script running while they're, in your appointment with your permissions so that they have the notes of the appointment there and they can easily kind of put in what those notes were and what those next steps are. So looking for ways to make the time of our clinical team members be more patient facing and less focused on documentation.
Now, building on that, I know your CEO has spoken about the kind of incredible staffing shortages your industry is facing in the coming years. So, to what extent has that been helping so far? Because he's been very direct and honest about that. It's, in many cases, there aren't many people to even hire for the jobs that you're staffing for. So it's like, people want care, they want speedy care. You referenced bringing in agents that can kind of help and supplement. But I would guess a lot of your work involves just navigating that. Someone who's angry that they couldn't get a call back fast enough, or they couldn't get an appointment fast enough. Like, you're at this kind of epicenter of, like you mentioned before, AI and the kind of technology, and really also trying to serve people who expect this very, refined customer experience. And so how are you getting through that every day?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult. Certainly, if you call on a Monday morning, you're probably waiting a little bit longer than you might be on a Wednesday or Thursday, just because, people like to save up their health questions until Monday morning and then call. But like, it's a reality of this industry and the pressure that this industry, and it's not Inova specific, it's all of us are facing, which is, there is higher levels of acuity. There is a great need for care. There is a larger volume of the population that is getting into their more mature years. And all of that is equating to a demand that is not always, or at least is at risk for not having enough supply, as you mentioned, Stephen's talked about. And so I think we're doing a lot of different things as it relates to training team members, looking at different care pathways of how somebody gets care, looking at the care continuum in terms of, something that used to be inpatient is now outpatient and can be safely and comfortably done in an outpatient setting, how technology helps us. It saves time for the physicians. It saves time for the nurses. What we can do when it comes to that, getting that appointment, getting that patient education, or on the back end, paying your bill or having your questions, looking at where we can use technology to make all of those things more seamless. So I don't think it's certainly a one solution. I think there are dozens of things that Inova and any other health system are probably looking at in order to be able to absorb the demand that is here now and is only going to be increasing. And so, I think we've also recognized that it's not just what do we do to manage this, but it's also how do we make this place really compelling place to work and make it so that people want to stay here. And we do. We have one of the best employee retention rates in the industry. And it is because, over the last 6-7 years, we have had a deliberate and focused effort on building a very strong, very responsive, very engaged culture. And we are transparent, we are communicative, and we really try to listen to our team members and put the benefits in place that we know that they want and are going to be responsive to. And I think the tone that Stephen Jones, our CEO, has set has enabled that culture. We don't get distracted with a lot of different things going on. We stay focused on our mission and on delivering the best healthcare to the community that we are privileged to serve. And that is why it becomes such a sticky place that, team members want to stay at. They want to build their careers here because we create opportunity, but we also create an environment that is really rewarding.
Interesting. Wonderful. Tracy, I've loved chatting with you, and I love how you have so much experience in traditional brands, but now you're really at this intersection of AI and healthcare and have been at this moment where your communication is just changing so rapidly. So thank you so much for joining us. And it's just been a thrill to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I've loved talking with you.
You've been listening to the Provoke podcast, brought to you by Provoke Media and produced by the international broadcast specialist Marketeers.